all at once, emerged into a perfect, all-encompassing dread, moving without my help. If oversharing were a sport, Veronica would take Olympic gold. I'd like to say I'd known Ronnie all my life, and most people would believe it, based on how much I knew about her. There wasn't any part of her life she didn't tell me. Stories, memories, and ideas flowed out of her effortlessly, restraint being a completely foreign concept to her. I never minded, though. I'm perfectly content to let her talk herself hoarse, even if my ears fell off. She needed the release as much as I needed the noise, an effortless symbiosis that powered our friendship. I knew how she almost cut her thumb off with a paring knife when she was 6, how she snuck 3 people into her room through her 3rd-story window, and where her mom hid the color contacts. People couldn't even tell if her mom wore them in the first place. Despite all of it, the stories, embarrassments, long nights watching scary movies, everything, she always found ways to ask about me in between breaths. My hobbies, interests, and aspirations were absorbed with as much clarity as her own. And she remembered, too. She could recall fine details about anything, even if I'd only mentioned it once. For better or for worse, Ronnie had a big memory, and an even bigger mouth. We went everywhere together, clinging to each other like conjoined twins. We were a package deal that wouldn't be separated. That's what made college that much more scary. High school finished unceremoniously. Ronnie graduated with high honors and a fancy scholarship to UPenn to study biochemistry. I didn't have the level of aptitude she had, so I settled on a quiet state school an hour from my house. In hindsight, I should have known the world wouldn't be kind enough to keep us together. I hadn't known her for that long, but it felt like a piece of me was scooped out, and the space she once occupied was refusing to be filled. I felt hollow, weak, and gray. A promise to stay in touch and continue to talk every single day seemed just as hollow. Anyone in a long-distance relationship knows how Herculean a task it can be, especially between college students. Over time, little by little, we fell out of touch. Calling every Sunday turned into every other Sunday, then a few times a month. I would respond to her posts, always being met with an enthusiastic, "Let's catch up soon," followed by even more weeks of silence. Time marched onward, and Ronnie receded further into my memory. By my senior year of college, I only thought of her when I smelled old pennies or lavender perfume, or when I'd go out to our favorite coffee shop back home. Times like that. After I graduated college, I found myself stuck. I was unsure of my expectations and equally unwilling to find out. My diploma says I have a degree in biology, but was that truly what I wanted to do in life? As many other broke college graduates come to realize, I probably should have figured that out before the loans piled up, with bills flooding my mailbox and no time to regret my decisions. I found a job at a body donation facility. Without bogging down the flow, this is the gist. The company connects the recently deceased with organizations that can use their bodies for science. Those who want to donate their bodies to further scientific and medical education are taken to the facility, processed, and dismembered according to the needs of the client. And after that, their body parts are shipped to them in big metal trucks all across the country. So, as the title suggests, my job is to process the donors, dismember them, and package them. Lucky me. Despite the grotesque nature of the work itself, I work alongside a great team. The pay is good, and I finally feel like I have carved a path for myself. If that means I have to work in a literal icebox with dead bodies every day, so be it. Adjusting to the smell was easier than I expected, the N95 doing most of the heavy lifting. But even for the more difficult aspects, it was relieving to know that I had good co-workers to lean on if I needed it. Unfortunately, this seemed to be one of those days. Erin, the most senior of us, was the de facto leader, responsible for reading out the orders and indicating what specimen needed to be produced from a given donor. Lukewarm coffee in hand, she scanned through her clipboard, occasionally blurting out the procurement notes. Patient 5, cephalic, bilateral, P3, and eviscerate. Who wants it? Cephalic means head, bilateral means both arms, and P3 was short for pelvis to toes, and eviscerate means, well, exactly what it sounds like. Calling them our patients always made me chuckle, because it felt more natural than calling them donors. We obviously weren't treating them, but we handled them with the same level of care. After a pause, Jesse's hand rose lazily. Yeah, sure, I got it. Also, how many total today again? 11 total, Aaron replied, eyes never leaving the clipboard. Ideally, we'll be out of here on time, so don't fuck anything up, messy. Jesse scowled at her, with Aaron's faint grin peeking out from over the clipboard. He grumbled out a weak retort. Nina, Ty, and I snickered at the two of them. Aaron continued, the 5 of us silently choosing our patients for the day. We all ended up with 2 patients, Aaron solemnly taking the extra. She droned through the memos, gave us a curt nod, and shooed us toward the changing rooms. The mornings were always slow, but we had the luxury of working at our own pace. We gowned up in silence, slipping our masks and goggles on, before moving to the box. The box, as it was affectionately nicknamed, was our workspace. Large metal lab tables lined the windowless room, blinking LEDs above each one. An industrial tool closet sat in the far corner of the room, housing all of our daily equipment. Contrary to my assumptions, the box was typically flooded with a pungent, lemony smell instead of the stench of death. The scented chemical cleaners cemented a permanent citrus odor into the space, interrupted only by the assault that was procurement. The worst part of the box was the ventilation. Predictably, massive gusts of air pumped into the room, just cold enough for us to work on the donors without freezing ourselves. A neat row of human-sized cubbyholes lined the back wall, all of them adorned with walk-in freezer handles. Canvas-covered gurneys were parked against the wall, a line of mottled gray toes peeking out from the end of each one. The only color in the room was the neon yellow tag separating each donor, tied to the big toes like yard signs. Ty yawned audibly, dragging his hand through the tags before moving to the tool closet, flicking on our portable speaker on the way. Aight, who needs what? Anything specific or just the use? Just scalpel and saw for me, please, I chirped, the mask muffling most of my voice. Ty flashed me a thumbs up, taking requests from each of us in order. Setting my supplies aside, I found my first patient and wheeled them onto the table. Each patient always had their documentation at their feet, complete with a medical history, cause of death, and procurement details. I quickly scanned the paper, eager to get the first one out of the way, as Led Zeppelin crackled out from the speakers. Peeling back the canvas, I greeted my first patient, their shriveled gray face and milky eyes offering no reply. I went through my usual assessment, my face tightening reflexively. I checked his entire body for surgery and fracture scars, peeling back his eyelids for any corneal abrasions. Gently palpated his stomach for any excess gastrointestinal movement, and flexed all of his appendages. All scars accounted for, no abrasions, no GI movement, and all appendages had full flexion and extension. Writing down my notes, I watched as his half-open eyelid drooped close, gravity attempting to revert my inspection. Aaron often had to remind me that it's not like they're gonna protest, but it still gave me the creeps watching bodies move without my help, especially after jostling them around so much, forcing my goosebumps to recede. I was interrupted by Nina, a look of indignation plastered on her face. Hey, you good over there, Nina? Huh? Oh, yeah, sorry. Check this out, though. Poor girl. I set the documents down. All of us, now clustered around Nina's patient. She was as gray as my patient, but her face was covered with purple bruises, a long gash wedged between her eyebrows. From a quick scan, I figured maybe it was from a fall, but her torso told another story. A smattering of brown and purple bruises painted her skin. and her chest visibly concaving in the center of it all. She had to be no older than mid-50s, younger than the majority of our patients. I caught a pitied sigh from Erin, striding over to gently palpate the stomach. A wretched crunch and gurgle escaped the woman, a dark maroon pool rising in her mouth. Wincing at the guttural noise, I watched the donor's shallow stomach distend once more, the pool in her mouth draining back inside her. Ugh, how tragic. Car accident, yeah? Yeah, Nina said, eyes downcast. No older than my mom, too. Just terrible. She trailed off, the rest of us digesting the scene. Ty, the least experienced of us, chimed in. So, wait, that was her blood? How does that work? Well, Erin grunted, wiping her hands on the smock. Most likely, rupture from the crash. Internal bleeding from an erotic rupture, I'd say. Nina, she have eviscerate orders? Nina slipped her gloves off, flipping through the folder of documents carefully. Nope, not her. Bilat forearms, knee down, and pelvis. What? We're gonna have to discard the rest anyway, so, after y'all finish procurement, we can check out what happened together. She patted the patient's bony shoulder. The rest of us nodded eagerly. Hey, Jesse, slide that trash over here. Jesse positioned the can beside the patient's ribs, already knowing where this was going. With practiced precision, Erin lined up the scalpel blade between ribs 9 and 10, dragging the blade swiftly between them. Tar black ichor drained from the incision, a sickly waterfall of blood cascading into the trash noisily. Give her, I don't know, 20 minutes draining before you go for that pelvis, unless you feel like getting showered. Nina shrugged playfully, Jesse's eyes puckering beneath his goggles. Hey, not this early, Ninny. I've already queued just to get high, and I don't want my tears mixing with your gut juice. We all groaned in unison. The mere mention of Nickelback putting a bad taste in our mouths. Jesse raised his hand defensively, Ty giving him a light punch on the arm before sauntering over to his table. Smiling inside my mask, I walked over to my station, immigrant song gracing my ears once more. My first patient was cephalic, bilat hands, and a P3. Going for the head first was always a pain, but it made the weight distribution for the P3 a little more manageable. Cradling his head in my arms, scalpel at the ready, I glanced up at the row of gurneries. For whatever reason, the last one in the row caught my eye, and it only took a moment to realize why. Despite all the donors having a yellow ticket on the toe, one gurney at the end of the line was missing theirs. I frowned, hoping Ty didn't lose it accidentally. Counting as I went, the last gurney had no paperwork or tag in sight. My frown turned to intrigue. Hey, Erin, I called out over my shoulder. You sure we only have 11 today? Erin looked up from her donor, scalpel in hand. Yep, just 11 today. What's up? There's an extra in the line. Late arrival, perhaps? It wasn't uncommon for us to get 1 or 2 donors delivered throughout the day, but they were always dropped off with their paperwork and yellow tag. Erin groaned, already irritated at the possibility of lost paperwork. Wasn't told about any extras today. Maybe they just came early to be processed tomorrow? Fair enough, but wouldn't they have their documents and stuff? Personal effects too? I mean, they're supposed to, Erin continued, sidling up at the foot of the gurney. She peeked under the tarp and squatted down to look around underneath the donor. Huh. Guess they're missing theirs. Mind wheeling them over to the auxiliary freezer down the hall? I'll try and get a hold of our delivery guys and see what the deal is. No problem, I replied, setting my current patient's head down. I traded spots with Erin, rolling the mystery donor down the dark hallway to the auxiliary storage. Beyond the strange lack of documentation and yellow tag, other things felt off about the donor. As the gurney's bad wheel echoed noisily, I noticed their toads were much pinker than the other donors were. It wasn't unheard of to get a young donor, but it was certainly rare, and all the sadder. The canvas had a thin layer of dust on it too, typical of donors who'd been left out for a few days. I certainly don't remember anyone behind on their work, especially for a donor this young. What gives? Was this supposed to be in our caseload today? I shook off the notion. Erin is a robot when it comes to bookkeeping. She wouldn't have forgotten one. Stepping into the auxiliary freezer room, I pushed my donor toward the nearest open cubby, the freezer door already open for preservation. Lining them with the cubby, I suddenly stopped cold, a wave of confusion climbing up my spine. They didn't just move, did they? No. I saw something move for sure, but that can't be. I must have moved funny when I was lining them up. Scrunching my face, I grabbed the corner of the canvas, intent on ripping it off and onto the floor, but I was stopped yet again. Movement. A shift underneath, near the face. I knew I wasn't imagining it. But then, what? I swallowed hard, unable to process the scene as I dragged the canvas off. Finally exposed, I sighed in relief, laughing at myself a bit sheepishly. Her paperwork was just sitting on her face instead of on her legs. Of course it would shift as I repositioned her. I shook my head in embarrassment and was thankful Jesse or Ty weren't there to make fun of me. The donor was indeed young, a cavalcade of blonde hair spilling out behind the thick manila folder. Her hands rested gently at her sides, palms toward the sky in peace. Her skin was remarkably clean, not a sign of any bruising or scar tissue whatsoever, save for a nearly imperceptible scar on her thumb, just below the joint. I blinked for a moment, processing silently. So, if she does have her paperwork, I should bring her back, right? Picking up the documents, intent on finding their filing date, her face shot spikes through me, eyes anchored on her visage. The folder slipped from my grasp. The sounds of falling paper echoed in the isolated room, mouth agape and hands trembling. I grabbed the wall for support as a torrent of memories overwhelmed my senses, my breathing rapid and shallow. It was Ronnie. Her cheeks were slightly pink, but she was most certainly dead. I wheezed through my mask, the world refusing to stop spinning. Worst of all, with her eyes half open and palms to the sky, she was smiling like a fool, teeth glittering in the low light and not a wrinkle in sight. The color drained from my face at the sight, a torrent of physical shock setting in. I wanted to scream, I wanted to puke, and I wanted to leave. Even now, writing this, I don't know what compelled me to stay, but I eventually hobbled her over, my eyes the size of dinner plates. Hundreds of questions flooded my brain, spiraling into a vortex of panic and grief. Then, all at once, it merged into a perfect, all-encompassing dread, as Ronnie's eyelids drifted close, moving without my help. Thank you for staying until the end of the show. I appreciate you giving me some of your time, and I look forward to seeing you again. If you can tell me what you enjoyed about today's episode, that will help me so I know what things to give you more of. This story came from Reddit user u/LastOfTheOuroboros, and there is a part 2 to this story that I plan on releasing as well after this one. So be sure to tell them thank you for letting me read this, and also subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss the next part. Another 2-part story is my last video, where I read the first part of a story about a teenage girl who learned of sinister and supernatural happenings in her best friend's house. So, if you're interested, feel free to check that one out. And if you want to listen to more of my voice, you can listen to all the episodes in this series here. I am on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, and all other places you can find podcasts if you're interested in listening to this kind of stuff outside of YouTube. The link to the original post and my platforms will be in the description for you to check out at your convenience. And if you have a story you'd like to recommend to me, you can reach out to me via Reddit, Discord, or email. Again, if you enjoyed today's episode, tune in for the next story, or just go back and watch the last one. But, until then, I hope I gave you chills, excitement, or a fright. Thank you for listening, and to all, a good night.